is wearing gray clothing, always gray clothing, a long coat. Some folks say kind of dressed like a pirate. Now, that could be because he was a sailor, And then get this, sometimes he's described as not having legs.
Wow.
So I don't know if that's because of the way he died or what, The spirit, who knows?
Yeah, it's an apparition.
Right.
Could be incomplete. I mean, we have no knowledge of these things,
No.
Wow, that's interesting, man. The Gray Man of Pawleys Island.
Exactly. South Carolina.
Yeah, and again, Kev, we have to invite our listeners, if you've had a sighting of the Gray Man or can add anything to this, BigfootTerrorInTheWoods.com, hit the contact button, and that's where you get a hold of us.
You got it.
Wow, Kev, good story.
Yeah, good
Is
stuff.
that it? I mean, is that where we're going with that?
Yeah, that's it.
No,
Sorry.
It's excellent. No, it's excellent. No, that's really enough. And the fact that there was a love story attached to it.
Yeah, it's kind of cool.
Yeah, it makes it more not cool for him or her,
No.
but cool nevertheless. Interesting too that their house didn't get attacked. I don't know what that had to do with it.
That's wild. I have no idea.
Yeah, it's like it was protected. Amazing. Well, I have a real interesting Bigfoot account here today. And I don't know. Let me just dig into it, and we'll talk about it and see what the listeners think or have to say about it. This particular account was told to me by a fellow named Perry Michaels, a resident of the state of Washington. And basically, this is what Perry had to say about his sighting one day in July. I was with a group of 7 hikers, all of whom were and are personal friends of mine. All of us regularly hiking together. We were walking in a line, spaced maybe some 10 or 15 feet apart, at fairly high elevation nearing our destination, which was Desolation Peak. We were on a fairly steep slope that was in bloom with thousands of wildflowers, with Ross Lake in view far below us in the distance. The slope that we were on descends to form what I will refer to as a valley between it and an adjoining hillside, which was off to our left. Aside from the grass and the wildflowers, which gave the appearance, or this area the appearance, of an alpine meadow in Europe, everywhere that you looked were clusters of what I believe are small spruce trees, none of which I believe were or are more than 25 to, say, 30 feet tall, with many of them seeming much smaller than that. The day was beautiful, with the exception of a haze that was hanging over both the mountain and the lake below us. The haze in no way hindered our ability to see fairly far in virtually any direction. This entire area is covered in, say, 30% trees, and the rest is all open meadow-like terrain, which is itself covered in grass and flowers as well. The reason I mention all of this is so that you understand that unless something or someone was to deliberately stop to conceal itself in a patch of small trees, it would only be a matter of seconds before it would be visible again as it walked. Whenever we as a group get together, there's very little chatter going on amongst us because we are all of the same kindred spirit. We hike to get away and immerse ourselves in the natural world, and part of that escape is to leave jabbering behind. We were about 4 hours into the hike, having reached the area that I just described to you, when Joey, who was taking the lead, had stopped and pointed towards the base of the adjoining slope, saying, "Hey guys, check that out." From our position, we were more than likely 1,000 feet higher, looking down across this valley at two figures walking in single file below us on the opposing slope. These two figures were both very dark in color from head to toe, and walking on two legs, with what I will describe as a rather unusual type of gait. Both Joey and I were carrying good field glasses. The two of us brought both of the creatures into focus, immediately realizing that what we were looking at were two Sasquatch. Talking quietly, everyone wanted to have a look at the critters, so we passed the glasses back and forth amongst us, watching these creatures walk along the slope. With the exception of them passing from time to time behind some of these short trees that I described to you earlier, we watched them walk for well over 1,000 yards or more. It was then at that point when the pair of creatures entered into a small patch of trees, but did not come out on the other side. At that moment, we collectively decided to descend the slope, keeping ourselves well concealed as we did so, in the hope of getting a closer look at them when they re-emerged from the cover of the trees. Having descended the slope, angling ourselves towards where we knew they were, we had now achieved a distance of maybe 500 yards away from them, and we dared not get any closer. It's not that we were afraid, so to speak, but the slope from this point forward was virtually devoid of any further tree cover on our side. Each of us sat hidden behind a number of trees, waiting and hoping that the Sasquatch would once again show themselves. Our group sat still and watched this patch of trees intently for the better part of an hour, when one of the Sasquatch came darting out of the trees. It was in pursuit of what we could see was some type of small critter running around on the ground. Speaking for myself at the time, I thought this was a groundhog or something of the sort. And after a brief pursuit, it looked to me like the creature stomped on it and killed it. I say this because it did in fact stop running suddenly, and I couldn't see the critter running anymore either. With that, the creature reached down to the ground and lifted something into the air, which to my eyes was in fact a dead animal. With that, it re-entered the cover of the trees, and some 10 minutes later, both of them came back into view. I put my glasses on them squarely and could see now that they were both holding at least several of the same type of animal in their hands. Initially, as we waited, we were all wondering what they were doing in this patch of trees for an hour. However, now we know they had gone in there for a reason. There was obviously some type of den or burrow in there where they acquired these animals. Perhaps they were waiting at the entrance, or even digging it up, which is something we will never know. What we do know is what we saw. They had come empty-handed and were leaving with both hands full. The two of them casually began to retrace their steps back in the direction from where we had first seen them. Using the average tree height around us as a gauge, I estimated they were somewhere between 8 and 12 feet tall. Of course, we had no way of really telling, but they were certainly very tall and broad. At one point, as we were walking, the one taking up the rear actually kind of swatted the one in front of it with one of the dead critters on its back. To me, it looked very much like a gesture of kidding around, like you or I would do with each other. The entire sighting was obviously something that none of us would ever forget. And I have to say to you that up until that point in my life, I hadn't really given their existence much thought. Having seen the pictures and heard the stories, it was more or less a meaningless thing to me as to whether or not they did or didn't exist. But after that day, my viewpoint and outlook has obviously changed dramatically. These creatures are in fact real, and now the 7 of us know it for ourselves. What do you make of that, Kev?
Little groundhog hunting. Pretty impressive. 7 people seeing them for so long, right?
Yeah, and
Greater
again,
than
they
1,000 yards.
They had altitude on them when they first sighted them, right? He said they were like 1,000 feet above them.
Yep.
Which reminds me of that, was it Alaska, that footage we saw a long time ago?
Yeah, where they were out on the snowfield, like on the mountainside. Yeah.
Yes, and they saw that little black creature in the distance just kind of...
I think it was up in British Columbia, near Alaska, but I'm just going by memory. But I was thinking about the same thing, Bill, where it was a bunch of hikers on the ridge, and they're looking, and they're like, what is that?
Yeah.
And they're looking at it with the binoculars, but in this case, you had two Bigfoot.
Yeah, real interesting. And, of course, dark head to toe. Anybody in their right mind at that point knows you're not looking at a couple of hikers. Come on.
No.
And it also reminded me of that account. And this is why I do accounts periodically, folks. I do repeats or rerun. Because, first of all, I love them. Second of all, there's always new people coming. And third of all, Bigfoot and the discovery and discussion around Bigfoot is all about repetition. It reminds me of that account, Kev, if you recall, where that guy heard the whacking or thumping on logs, however he described it, and he wound up pulling down, he saw that Bigfoot knock down that dead tree and grabbed the, what was it, a possum?
Yeah. From inside the tree.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like he was listening to it to hear inside that something was in there,
that.
So these guys, I mean, you think about it. Think about how a cat stands by a mole's hole or a mouse hole and waits.
Oh yeah, they're patient.
Yeah, they could have been sitting there and then took their big mitts and started ripping the den apart, grabbing them as soon as they tried to snap at them.
Yep.
Just incredible, huh?
Pretty wild.
Yeah, I mean, it's good stuff. And, folks, by the way, if you've seen something, say something. Again, you can get us at BigfootTerrorInTheWoods.com, the contact link. And I'll be in touch with you, man. I want to hear what you have to say, and that's how these things come about.
100%. That's super cool, Bill. And that was in beautiful Washington State, where I lived for 4 or 5 years. Pretty cool place.
Did you ever hear of Desolation Peak?
There's a lot of names out there that are like that, kind of these bleak names. So
yeah,
it sounds a little familiar. Yeah.
Yeah, and Ross Lake, Ross.
That doesn't sound familiar, but
yeah, I would imagine there's a lot of lakes up in the woods up there too. Yeah. Interesting, though. Very interesting. And another great account of Bigfoot actually being seen somewhat on the hunt, right? A little different way.
Absolutely. Chasing those little groundhogs.
Yeah. Or whatever they were. Who knows? Maybe. Yeah. Some type of critter.
Prairie dogs, whatever.
How about his estimate between 8 and 12 feet?
I'm glad you mentioned that, because the 12 foot is like, oh my God.
Yeah.
That's like Godzilla.
Yeah, well, if you're measuring up at 500 yards based on what's around you, it's a very indefinite science, obviously.
Absolutely.
But whatever they were big.
Big. I'll go with big.
I'm sitting in a room here with 8-foot ceilings, and I don't want to face anything with 8-foot ceilings and a 4 or 5 or 6 foot wide shoulder.
No.
It's just unbelievable. So that's it, Kev. I mean, a great account.